Okay, well, good morning and welcome everyone. Appreciate that you could be here this morning with us. I'm here with my colleague Gustavo Gordillo, who's will help monitor the chat if you have questions as we go through. I'm also open that if you have a question as we're going through, you could use the raise hand function if you'd like, or if you want to unmute yourself and say, hey, I have a question, that would be fine too. If you have not already chosen the language that you would prefer to listen in, through the little globe button at the bottom of your little toolbar for Zoom, there's a little globe looking thing. If you click on that for interpretation, you can choose to listen in on English, which I will be speaking in, or in Spanish. Our translation today will be taken care of by Linda Eubank, who graciously joined us on relatively short notice. So Linda, thank you so much for being here and joining us. So the workshop today, and I've talked to several of you, I know several of you are in the process of starting new businesses, and there's a few of you that I don't really know. If you wanted to put your information in the chat, that's great. I do have the registration. If we had fewer people, I'd be more tempted to go around and have everybody introduce themselves, but we only have about an hour of time today, and I have probably 3 hours worth of stuff to cover. But I'll get through what I can. I actually see today's workshop on business plan development, starting a new business, as a kind of introduction for some of you to developing a business plan. You know, when you're starting a new business, there's several good reasons to have a business plan. One of them is just kind of to put your thoughts down and get your ideas together. Another one is to kind of make sure you understand your business model and how much money it's going to take to start your business, just to open the doors, get some projected revenues going. And if you're going to do anything like try to apply for a loan or get grants, which there aren't many grants for starting a new business out there, there are a few. Any loan agency or person that's going to look to invest in your business or give you money is going to look for a business plan. So lots of reasons to have a business plan. What I'm going to do today is go through relatively quickly the different components of a business plan. I won't have time to get into lots of depth on any of these particular slides or issues, but I certainly will look forward to meeting with many of you afterwards. We could do one-on-one meetings. We could also look to do a follow-up workshop here in person at the Chamber of Commerce, where I could work with you more specifically on building the business plan for your business. So again, thank you all very much for being here this morning. So, and most of you know, or some of you know, about our Impact Beaverton program that Gustavo and I work with. And it's a collaboration between the City of Beaverton's Economic Development Program or Department and the Chamber of Commerce to provide one-on-one support, free counseling, workshops like this one for anybody opening a business or that wants to expand a current business in and around Beaverton. So look forward to working with you. Most of the materials we have are available in both English and Spanish. So the workshop goal for today is kind of just understand the main components of a business plan, kind of have an outline of it. There are a bunch of resources at the very end of these slides, and I can send you the resources later through an email. But there's a bunch of different links I have built into the presentation today, and I can send you that list of resources and links after the workshop so that you have more of these templates related to building a good business plan. And I've already mentioned a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit more as we go through about the different reasons you would want a business plan and the different components where different areas are going to focus, or different people who are reading your business plan might focus, right? And then I'll also make the recommendation or some suggestions on other places you can go to get further help. So again, because we only have an hour of time and we have a number of people on the call, I'm not going to try to do the introductions that would take up a bunch of time. I do want to get to know each of you. And if we had more time and we're in person, I would certainly have all of you introduce your business. And then I would be able to build examples as we go through related to your businesses. I do have kind of, when you signed up, I have all your organization's name and that. I will be using a running example of kind of a hardware store, a hardware supply, lumber supply store throughout the presentation today. So I'll cover the main components of a good business plan. Later, I will talk about different resources available for finding different templates for doing a business plan, and discuss what I'll focus on today is the different elements of a good business plan. And so here are the basic overview, right? It's these sections are the basics of your business plan. So you have an executive summary, and we'll talk about this later. You kind of write that last. your company overview, products and services, marketing analysis, operation plan, marketing and sales plan, which is different than your market analysis, a financial plan, and then also kind of key personnel and partnerships. And so what I want to just jump right in to these and try to give examples as we go throughout the workshop today of the different sections. And again, I don't have time to go into detail. This is meant more as a quick overview. And what I'll do is I'll pause every couple of slides to see if there's any questions, if anybody in the group would like to ask questions. So, but your company overview is basically just that. It's just a simple summary of what your business does, including the industry that you're in. Do you plan to open much, have several stores? Is it one location? Are you going to be selling online? So it's kind of a brief overview of kind of the goods and services and kind of where you're going to be doing business. So the example I brought up, so I in the background in my past, I used to run a couple hardware stores in Northern California. And so it's an industry that I know. But if I were, say, to start, want to start I see the question. Yeah, I can share some of the information with the slides later. For sure. So my background with hardware, I think in terms of if I were going to start a hardware supply store, not just a hardware store, but a supply store that was basically providing raw materials for people that are doing several different things: construction, landscaping, or home remodeling, right? So if you think in terms of here in Beaverton, there's that whole section now that's South Cooper Mountain. There's a whole bunch of development that's going on there. Might not be a bad time to start a business. There's a lot of new construction going on in different areas, and it might actually end up being a good location to be over there. And so if I were to describe or have a short description of the business, it would be Family Hardware Supply, LLC, assuming we're an LLC, family owned, right? Saying this is a family owned business, not a national chain, family owned hardware supply business. And then what is our focus? Our special focus is to be a one-stop source of materials for local construction, landscaping, and home remodeling business with services in multiple languages. So I'm given a little overview of this is kind of what we do, and with a special focus of services available in multiple languages. Certainly when you write up a company overview in your business plan, you're going to have more detail. It might be up to a page. It probably wouldn't be more than about a page long, right? So that's kind of the company overview. And then after your company overview, you would go into your next section would be kind of an overview of your products and services. And this is where you would give more detail about what specific products and services do you provide. So if you are, say you're starting a restaurant or a food place, you would want to talk about what range of food, appetizers are going to be open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Are you going to have liquor, just beer and wine? Those kind of things are where you're going to get at the specific range of products and services that you provide. And so this also starts to get at business model, and business model is this kind of system by what are we doing, what services or products are we selling that people are paying us money for, and then what's the process for preparing that? Are we doing, manufacturing? Are we doing wholesaling? Are we doing retail, et cetera? So at Family Hardware Supply, the overview I would give of products and services is that the businesses aim to try to work one-on-one closely with people that are doing building projects or landscaping projects, so that we would meet directly with the clients to talk about their project that they have going on, so we become partners in their project. So this becomes a little different than just a source of, oh, well, I want to order a bunch of lumber. It becomes the product and service we're selling isn't just the hardware supply or the lumber supply, it's the expertise of the people that work with our business. So that's part of what we're selling, right? So we aim to provide precise timing for deliveries. Anybody who's been dealing with manufacturing or construction or medical parts or anything in the last couple of years have known about supply chain issues that a lot of businesses have had. And so if I were setting up a business like this, I want to make sure that our partners, though, know that we're on top of the kind of supply chain of the industry. Because if you end up with one supply, if you're building the basic foundation for a building or you're trying to put up the walls and you end up with a shortage of either lumber or sheetrock, et cetera, it slows down the whole rest of the project, right? So that supply chain becomes absolutely critical. And so with the business, the fictitious business of Family Hardware Supply, part of what we're selling is not only the goods that we provide for them, the lumber, sheetrock, landscaping supplies, but it's also the knowledge and expertise of the people that work for the business. All right. I don't see any questions coming up. If anybody has any questions as we go, please feel free to either raise hand. I can see, I probably would see you raise hand function. And if somebody puts something in the chat, I'll get a notice that should pop up. So, all right. So the next piece after you've gone through your products and services is to figure out, okay, what's the market out there? How do we know that there's an industry for this? All right. I'll use an example. So Beaverton's an interesting place right now. There has been, I don't know how many breweries that have opened in the last 15 years, right? So if somebody were to come to me and say, I'm going to start a brewery, the question is, great. And how are you going to be different, or how are you going to know that you're going to be able to reach customers? Because doesn't mean you wouldn't be successful opening a brewery, but there's been a whole bunch of them open in and around Beaverton in the last few years. And so your market analysis is, how do you know, like, who else is out doing this work? How do you know customers are going to be able to find you? How do you know that they're going to need the services and the goods that you're providing, right? And market analysis can be a whole lot of different things, or it can be relatively simple of watching traffic flow, or just finding, hey, everybody needs to eat, everybody needs to, people like to go out and be social, right? So we'll assume that if we put our brewery in the right location, people are going to come by it. Now, opening a hardware supply store may be a little bit more complicated than that, because you would need a whole lot of raw materials, right? You'd need a lot of goods to be able to set up shop, right? So what we'd be looking for if I were going to be doing market analysis for hardware supply businesses, okay, what's the industry trends? What's going on locally? I'm not selling internationally, I'm just selling locally. So I would want to look, what are the trends in new housing starts or apartment complexes, et cetera. Obviously, as most of you know, in the area I mentioned over on South Cooper Mountain, there's a whole bunch of development going up over there, over where the new high school is. There's also other pockets of new development going on all around Washington County. So part of what I would be looking at is, where do I want to sell? So part of my market analysis and part of my goods and services is figuring out not only where do I want to be located, but how far am I willing to travel, right? I may or may not want to try to ship things to Salem or distribute things to East Portland. So maybe my focus is Washington County, with an emphasis in, kind of the building hub that's going on around Beaverton and Hillsborough, right? So part of the information that I'm gathering through the market analysis is trying to find out what's going on with the industry locally, how many competitors are there in the region, and how are we going to capture our share of that market, right? So market analysis can be a whole bunch of detailed stuff. Usually when you're starting a business, you're going to be focusing locally, so you don't want national data of, I have a table that's listed here of construction spending in the US. Well, that's nice to know construction spending in the US, but what I'd really want to know is what's construction spending locally. Or if I'm starting a local service business, how much money do people spend at, say, a flower shop? Or how much money do people, if I'm doing home furnishings, right? How much money do people tend to spend when they go out to a home furnishing store to buy stuff, right? And how much stock do I need to have? Right. So that's all part of the market analysis, understanding who's out there, who's going to spend money on the materials and the goods that we're servicing. Right. So we've thought about what that market is that's out there. Right. So the next big step is figuring out your operating plan. And this is where you really have to figure out how much are you going to be open? What are going to be your hours? Are you going to open at 7 a.m.? Are you going to be open till 10? I think in terms of a construction business, right, or if we're serving the construction industry, a lot of people in the construction industry start early. So we would need to start early. If we really want to be a partner for construction organizations in building, right, we need to be there when they want to be, when they're ready to do business. And so I would envision opening at 7 o'clock in the morning and going till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Probably wouldn't need to run later than that. And then there's probably some Saturday hours. So think in terms of, when are people going to be needing our services? So you set your hours around when your customers are going to come in, right? And then what's the staffing going to be, right? How many people are we going to need at every location? This can be relatively simple. Starting a small retail shop, you might only need 1 or 2 people in the store at any given time. And there may be times where only one person is okay. Think in terms of starting a restaurant. I helped start a restaurant several years ago. We hired 40 staff to staff the restaurant, and at any given time, there was some combination of between 5 and 8 to 9 people working at any given time, right? Depending on how busy it was. So you have to think in terms of the hours and then customer flow as you're going through, as most of you know. You also will need to think about if you're going to use internet for sales, right? So some businesses are going to do a lot of transactions through their website. Some businesses are going to have a website that's really for informational purposes. So part of setting up your operations in your business is figuring out, are you going to use the internet for sales and customer development, or is it really going to be more of a source of just information so people can find you? You'll also, as you're setting up operations, have to figure out your sales and payment process. So here's a little trick. As you're putting together your business plan, one of the areas where I see people forget to put in costs is when you're doing your sources of revenues and then your sources of expenses. Very rarely when people develop their first business plan do I see them include bank and credit card fees. So if you're going to be having people pay with a credit card, which most of you will, you have to realize that no matter what people pay you, you're losing generally about 3%, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little bit less, right off the top, because that's what the bank and credit card fees are. So you might estimate sales of $100,000, and then you have all these other expenses, and you might say, hey, great, I got $3,000 in profits left at the end of the year. And if you forgot to put in bank and credit card fees, there goes your $3,000 in profit. So you have to remember to put in those kind of things, because that's the cost of doing business. So, and then there's lots of other expenses. I'm not going to go over those in detail, but this is part of your operating plan of how you're going to be gathering payment and getting payment from people. A big part, obviously, of operations is inventory management, right? You think in terms of, in some industries like restaurants, you have a lot of goods that could spoil. So you have to be very careful. If I'm doing the family hardware supply business that I mentioned, you know, a lot of the materials that we sell take up a lot of space, and that's where the supply chain, how much space do we need? A big warehouse? Do we need an outside space that we can just bring stuff to store it for a couple days? And if our specialty is kind of new home construction and remodeling, one of the things we might really try to do is kind of time our orders so we get in a pallet of wood like the day it's due to a client, so we're not sitting on a bunch of inventory. So inventory management becomes a critical part of running any kind of business. You also obviously going to have some level of control, process, managing the money, managing the inflow of goods. That could be if you're manufacturing or doing some work, preparing materials. Say you have a retail shop and you're going to sell bicycles. Are you going to actually put the bicycles together? How much time is that going to take, et cetera, right? And then obviously figuring out delivery methods and the customer relation strategy is all part of your operating plan. And so you need that marketing plan to kind of inform, okay, who are we trying to reach and how do we reach them? That market analysis and marketing plan will help you then develop your operating plan that comes next. All right, so let me stop there. Does anybody have any questions on these different components that I've covered so far? I don't see any hands raised and I don't see anything in the chat. So then these come together with your market and the sales plan. So we've thought about the kind of market analysis. We've now figured out an operating plan. We're not ready to kind of open our doors. We need to start figuring out, how do we want to go about marketing our materials? How are we going to get information out? So for some people, when you're starting, I've talked to some people, you know, starting a restaurant or starting personal care, like massage, or somebody that's starting, in this case, hardware, lumber, home supply store. You have to think about what's the best marketing tools. And yeah, there's lots of different online versions out there. There's certainly Facebook, and I don't know that anybody uses LinkedIn and Twitter and all those, but you have to think where your customer is going to be finding your information. So one of the ways I might track, if I'm starting something like family hardware supply, is trade magazines, trade publications, right? People in the construction industry will sometimes read trade publications or get online trade publications that then, you know, people put ads in, right? So it might be updates on what's going on in the industry and what are some new materials that are emerging. And so one of the ways to attract, depending on the type of industry you're in, is through trade publications, right? There may also be opportunities for direct mailing, right? Now, most of you, if you live in a home, you know that you get these mailers that come a couple times a month, usually, that have here's all the home supplies in the area, and here's people that do pest control, right? So direct mailing for some businesses is the right way to attract people. For some businesses, if you're in a travel destination, maybe a billboard works for some, right? So there's so many different opportunities. And you really have to think in terms of where are my customers going to, be. One of the things I would suggest if I were starting this family hardware supply store is one of the things we would do in terms of reaching new is go out and visit people at job sites. All right, people are busy, right? So one of the ways to let them know is to go visit them at a job site, find them when they're taking a break, and not do a strong sales pitch or anything, but just hey, hi, I'm Rob. I work at Family Hardware Supply. We're a new locally owned family business. Here's some things that we do to try to help out our local partners. Would love to chat with you if you have time, right? So it could be, a relatively non-hard sales pitch, but still a visit, right? Where are the people going to be? Go out to job sites, right? So visiting those job sites would be important. Going to local events and conferences, right? Again, in an industry like construction where they have trade shows, you can go to those trade shows. There are some for food, there are some for plants, right? So those are other areas where, especially if you're business to business, trade shows might be a good opportunity for you, right? And then obviously creating a website. And I'm not going to get into all the details of building out a website, but yeah, absolutely critical for your marketing and sales is to have a usable, good information, easy to navigate website that becomes part of your marketing tool with real clear information about, hey, call so-and-so. Hey, if you want more information, call Rob at, give a phone number, give a simple email for people to access you. So this becomes that marketing and sales plan. After you have that, and I'm going to do a quick check on time. Okay, perfect. So, because I'm trying to go through all this stuff relatively quick. And then so we have a bunch of time for questions at the end. So the next step of this is financial and startup plan. Okay, is startup costs. So for most businesses, you're going to have to spend some money before you ever have a customer, right? This is to get your retail store set up, and this, in my case, kind of a wholesale supply set up. Even if you're going to be doing massage out of a studio somewhere, you're still going to have to get things set up and buy materials. So any of the businesses that you're going to start, you're going to have to spend some money up front, and that's where these startup costs come from. So the startup costs are your one-time or very infrequent, like you might pay insurance for a whole year ahead of time, right? For your facilities, for equipment, for licensing, office supplies, initial inventory. These are all things that you have to spend money on before you ever have a customer, right? It might also be some marketing involved. You might have to have some people help set up, maybe if you're establishing a new store, you might have to pay people for a week or two to be able to outfit or stock up the store and do all the displays, right? So there also can be tenant improvement projects. So you need to put in new lighting. So those are all the things that are going to cost you money before you ever even open your doors for business, right? And again, this is kind of thinking more in terms of a storefront type of business as opposed to a business that you're working from your home. Even if you're working from your home, there still are going to be some costs in getting your business started. Might be a computer, might be some other supplies. Think in terms of if you're going to start a landscaping company, you might need to buy a truck. You may work out of your home or be based out of your home, but you may need to buy a truck or buy other supplies to be able to do the work you're going to be doing, right? So, and creating a kind of formal budget of all the different expenses to start up becomes important, because if you are going to be trying to get some funding, this is one of the key areas that people are going to look at when you're going to look for a loan or you're trying to get a grant or somebody to help share costs with some of the equipment is, what do you need? How much money do you need to spend just to open the doors? So two things related to this. So first, the list that's on the slide, the startup cost worksheet, has a pretty good list of all the different costs that might be incurred in trying to get your business up and started, right? Including initial inventory becomes absolutely critical, and that isn't necessarily always, so it's got listed down there, starting inventory. And that becomes a startup cost because you got to buy that initial inventory before you can start transacting business, and then replenishing your inventory becomes part of your operating budget, right? So that becomes a really critical piece of understanding that startup cost worksheet. The other thing to think about is what I'll call starting capital or cash, and it has a cash line that's on this. For most businesses, when you open, you have to expect that you're probably not going to be making profits for first 3 months, maybe the first 6 months, maybe even up to the first couple of years. And so you need to have an operating reserve set aside, savings account or checking account somewhere that you can pull money from as you need to be able to pay off bills, pay payroll, keep inventory up, as you need to, especially if you're an industry that has delays in payment. So if you think in terms of family hardware supply that I mentioned before, very common practice in the field is, you might want to try to do cash on delivery, but with a lot of construction, right, they also don't get paid all up front. So they get paid, at different installments when they're doing a project. So it's hard for them to pay a lot of cash up front or cash on delivery. So a lot of them would look to be able to maybe pay half up front and then pay the other half on delivery, or make 3 payment installments, or even have some other credit set up, right? So you have to kind of think when you're starting the business of how much cash do I need to be able to continue my operations as I go through the ebb and flow of cash payments, cash on hand, cash flow throughout the year, and especially if we're doing credit, right? So a couple things to think about there with those startup costs. Be as comprehensive as possible in what these startup costs are going to be. And then there's clearly always going to be ways that you can help kind of try to cut costs as you're buying equipment, by buying used equipment, leasing equipment, etc. But this is where you really start to get a sense of how much money do I need just to open the doors, right? The operating budget then becomes later, right? So if you just for a little more detail on this financial plan and startup costs, right? So I've categorized these into major groupings of expenses. And I think when you're building out your budget, this becomes important. Some of these categories are going to be repeated on your operating budget. Most of these are going to be big ticket items or things that are then depreciated out. So things that you don't expense. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but these are like facility improvements, the equipment you need, the licenses you get, right? So some of those things are kind of one-time costs up front, but the facilities, the equipment, and some of the other things that you need that are like hard tangible assets, like a truck, like the building, like the displays. These are pieces of equipment that are going to kind of cost out their life cycle over a number of years. Though you may still have to pay for them up front, you still then, in terms of your operating budget, you would have depreciation expense, and then that would be reflected on your balance sheet when you look at kind of equipment value or asset value, less accumulated depreciation. Again, topic for totally another workshop, but it becomes important to write all these things down, right? So you got the major assets, you got assets that'll need to be replaced maybe within 10 years. You got one-time costs that may never come back, which are kind of rare. Usually there's be some replacement cost over time. And then some that costs that become recurring once you open, like replacing inventory. Payroll obviously becomes relatively regular. Maybe you make insurance payments every 3 months, right? So all those different things, there are going to be some costs up front, and then some of those will continue on when the business starts to operate. And then the next one is just a little bit other, a look at all the different startup costs of kind of major expenses and long-term assets versus other key expenses. And again, always keep in mind those other 2 groups of expenses, so miscellaneous for incidental and starting cash that you'll need. Highly recommend, if you're going to start a business, go find a decent tax accountant to work with to help get your books set up and to help you in purchasing equipment and other things. They will understand, hopefully, what incentives are out there. There are certainly times where you can buy a piece of equipment and expense the whole thing out in the first year, which might be to your advantage. Other times you may not want to do that. So finding a good tax person, a good accountant to help you in the process of setting up your books, but also have you think about or give you advice on when to purchase certain things, how to note certain things, how to depreciate things. A good accountant will pay for themselves. So highly recommend, as you are thinking about getting your business started, of getting out there, sorry about that, of getting out there, talking to an accountant before you start doing a lot of expensing for your business, before you start buying a lot of equipment. All right. That's startup costs. Does anybody have any questions about estimating startup costs or other topics that I've covered so far. I have just a couple more slides I want to cover, and then I'm going to open it up and go back to open forum and get questions from folks. Okay, so once you have your startup budget, then you're ready to start creating a financial plan or an operating budget for your business. And this kind of worksheet that's here, this is what's called tax deduction for shop owners, is just a way for you to think about clustering the different expenses that you'll have. For some businesses, you know, it's relatively straightforward of the expenses, but it's good to start out with all of these different categories, and you may not have all these categories for your particular business. So you have to think in terms of what are your expenses. You know, it has some that are built in here like decor, which might be more of a startup expense than an operating expense. You may or may not have ongoing education as part of your budget, right? So you kind of have to think of not all of these categories might fit your business. You might not be spending much money for travel, et cetera, but this gives a good overview of the different things to think about as you are setting up your operating budget, right? The key thing to actually doing a good operating budget, this is where you start to figure out where's your break even, is knowing how many customers are you going to expect to have and kind of what's your average sale per customer. This is where all of your operating budget starts, is with projected revenue. And your projected revenue starts with that formula of how many customers am I going to have, say, every day or every week, and what's the average amount that one of those customers is going to spend, right? So if I start a retail flower shop, I might think, okay, I'm going to have 40 customers a day, and the average customer is going to spend $25, right? So then I have a sense of how much, if I do a good day, 40 customers spending $24 or, you know, $25 each, I would have revenues of about $2,000 a day, right? So then I'd have an estimate of what my revenues are, right? And if I'm open, say, 6 days a week, now I can figure out what my weekly revenues are, right? Typically, what would end up happening is you would show a little bit of growth over time. I'll give a sample of a one-year budget in a minute, but it's you kind of want to cluster the different sources of revenues that you have. So if you're starting something like a restaurant, maybe you have revenues from, say, appetizers, revenues from beverages, non-alcoholic beverages, revenue from alcoholic beverages, revenue from dinner items, revenue from dessert items, so that you're clustering your different sources of revenue. Some businesses might have direct service revenue, while others would have combined both service and product revenue. Others may just have product revenue, right? So as you're doing these expectations, and I can now give an example, right? So in terms of estimating revenue, so if I were to use an example of the family hardware supply business that I suggested before, I'm going to do revenue estimate. Say I'm starting the business and I expect to open in May, right? Heavier construction season, though construction does go on throughout the year. Figure I want to get started, open the doors in April, and so what I'm hoping my sales are for May to October, what would be my busy season, right? We're first year business, so if I were to say I want to get 4 a month of new home contracts, right, for a total of $60,000 in revenues for the month. This is kind of May through October. Remodeling contracts, get 8 of those, working with different people with an estimated amount. And then landscaping contracts, 10 per month at $4,000 each for $40,000. I can then get what my hopeful revenues for the month are at $148,000. So this is clustering. If I'm going to have 3 key sources of revenue, how many customers am I going to have in each of those sources of revenue? And what do I think the average expense is within each of those? Now, this is a very different type of business than what many of you would be starting. So you would be more like, my average customer is going to come in. I'm going to see, you know, if you're starting a little convenience store, maybe you have 100 customers a day and they spend an average of $10 or $12 each, right? So having an understanding of how many customers are you going to see, right? This gets at your hours, where are you located, and those things. And then what's your average sale per customer? This is where your assumptions start. Right. And so you'll have different sources of revenue. And so those different pockets of revenue will be, you know, you will, if you think in terms of a restaurant, average customer for breakfast probably spends less than the average customer for lunch, which generally spends a little less than the average customer for dinner. So you could break your revenues up into breakfast revenue, this many customers at this average cost, lunch, et cetera, et cetera. So clustering those revenues like into pockets of where they bundle, I think becomes important in making sure that your revenue assumptions are good. Then as you're going into estimating expenses, it's understanding all the different things on that prior sheet, right? Clustered together, because over time, what you want to be able to do as you're setting up your operating budget is to be able to track. So you may say the average payroll expense is about 30% of overall expenses, and then that becomes something that you can track over time. You may have cost of goods sold as 35 or 40% of your expenses, total expenses, right? So you know what your markup is on your goods. So you can track then over time our cost of goods percentage of expenses to revenues staying consistent or getting better maybe. Are your expenses for facilities staying relatively consistent? Are your expenses for payroll staying relatively consistent? And that's where you cluster all these, right? The other thing you also have to think about, if I think in terms of construction, there's going to be seasonality, so that can be really significant, right? I could maybe with Family Hardware Supply in the summertime be doing $150,000 to $200,000 per month. Maybe in slower months of December, January, February, and March, maybe I'm doing less than $100,000 a month, right? So you have to really think, how seasonal is the business that you're going into, right? I'm not going to go into super detail on the clarifying fixed versus variable expenses. We can save that for another conversation. But one of the things that as you start plugging the numbers in, you'll start to see, and there's formulas you can work, but you'll start to see, okay, at what months am I actually making money or having profit at the end, and what months might I be losing? It's very normal for most businesses to have some months that are generating profit, if you will, and some slower months that are showing a loss, right? That's not necessarily bad. That's very normal. If you think in terms of retail, most retail do a lot of business, say between October, November, December. A lot of them tail off for January, February, March, right? That's just the normal retail cycle with a few exceptions. I mentioned, a nursery or flower shop. Obviously, they do a big push in February with Valentine's Day and some other things going on, but otherwise they're going to slow down as well too. So think in terms of variability throughout. And as you start to play with the numbers, you'll start to think, okay, what do I need to do to be able to break even, right? So how much do I need to sell while paying myself a salary, right? Or you should make some wages while also making some money for myself. How many units do I need to sell, or what sales do I need every given week, every month, definitely every year, to be able to at least break even. Don't forget those things like taxes, payroll taxes, benefits, and all that as you're building out, as you're doing revenues, so that if you're paying somebody, say $50,000 of salary, realize that person is going to cost you at least 15% more in taxes and insurance, and could be even more if you're going to provide them benefits, could be up to 30% more. So that $50,000, you add another, 15% onto that, or 30% with all the taxes, benefits, healthcare. You're adding another $15,000 on that employee, so that employee is costing you $65,000 a year, not $50,000 a year. So that's all part of those estimates. A couple more quick things, and then I'll stop and get at questions and have some conversation. Last thing is just a projected budget format. Don't hold me on all these numbers. I haven't checked this recently. This is just a kind of mock-up of kind of what you would look at in terms of organization growing, say, starting in January. This is not intended to be the same example of the Family Hardware Supply that I mentioned, but just showing kind of estimated sales kind of going up, several of the expenses going up, like wages going up as the business grows on the bottom. So this is just a template, and I can send you a business plan template, an email that actually has this built into it. And what this can do is just give you an idea, again, of the different categories of expenses, different categories of revenues that you would have. And again, you have to remember it's got some of the key things that are down here, like sales commissions, which you may or may not necessarily have, website expenses. So this is not meant to be a super detailed budget. There's several categories that are not listed in the expenses here that you may have as expenses in your business. So this is just giving more of a format look than trying to be a full, complete budget example. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Last piece, or last two pieces, if you will, of your business plan. And again, going through all the different components of a business plan real quick. The last piece that you would focus on in your business plan, and some people would put this further up front in the business plan, is the key personnel and partners, right? Who are the people that are running the business? What experience do they have in running the business, right? So the example that I had of the family hardware supply, if we had several people that were starting that business, say we had 3 partners or 3 members were an LLC, maybe each of us had 20 years of experience working in, one worked in new home construction, one worked in landscaping, one worked in home remodeling. We're starting a business together because we know the industry, right? So our personal background, knowledge, history in those industries will be important. But also what would be important would be the partnerships that we have. The partnerships with the vendors, the partnership with the suppliers, the partnerships with the different construction industry or organizations out there or firms out there, so that we have these built-in relationships to be able to start growing the business. So some of it is, specific experience that you have. It might be related to education, maybe it's training that you have, etc. And the idea is to kind of give figures and facts and details about background or growing of companies. How big of a company have you managed in the past? You know, if I'm starting a big organization, for people to know that, hey, I used to manage a budget of $5 million working for XYZ Corporation. Okay, you know how to manage budgets. You know how to run an organization that's going to do a few $1 million in revenues for the year, right? The other thing that can help is, for some industries more important than others, is having a good accountant, having a good attorney, and or other business advisors, like a business banker, can be a good part of your success team. So, and then for some industries, professional associations can be meaningful, right? So several industries have very helpful professional associations. And so your affiliation with some of those professional associations might also be something worth mentioning in this section on key personnel and partners, right? Then the very last piece of your business plan, and this goes up front, but you write this last, right? Because you have all those other pieces together, because your executive summary is the little snippets that if somebody reads it, they have a sense of what your business is, what you're looking to do, and how your business is going to grow. And so I created an example with the family hardware supply, right? I'd thrown in this tagline I had kind of made up before: we help you build your success story. And then being very specific, our location in South Beaverton, kind of the area I mentioned, close to the most active new construction in Washington County. Okay, that makes sense. Our 3 owners, what I mentioned, have combined 65 years of experience in the industries. That's good. So little bits and pieces from the different sections of the business plan. Already established network of clients that express clear interest in finding a supplier that works with them and knows their business. Okay, so we have those contacts. We talk a little bit about supply chain, an important piece of it, right? Where we have those relationships, and then we're giving some numbers. So we expect first year revenues of $800,000. We plan to go to 1.5 million within 3 years. Our break-even point is 500,000, right? So I've given numbers. This would be specifically if I were going to be using a business plan to try to seek investors or to get a loan or possibly apply for some kind of grant. Again, not many grants out there for startup business, but what this does is this gives that snapshot of, here's the business, here's why we're going to be successful because of the people, and here's a summary of our numbers, and it's then those numbers. If I were then applying to a bank for a loan or looking for an SBA loan, I might have very specific additional line in there. We are seeking a loan of $100,000 to be able to purchase equipment, to be able to set up and start operations by May 2023, right? So then that gives more details. So that's your executive summary. It gives very specific details, and it's little snippets, maybe not of every section of your business plan, but all of those other components, right? I'm going to come back to the business plan templates later, and I can share those, but what I've just gone through relatively quickly, come back to that very first slide, is here are your main components of a good business plan if you want to start a business. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff. What I want to do is I want to stop sharing my screen now. I want to just open up for Q&A. Again, you can use the raise hand function. You can put your question in the chat. However you would like to ask a question, please go ahead.
Hi, Rob. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really helpful.
Thank you.
My name is Yunus. I am from Tiger, and my question to you is that if we go for co-bid registration, they ask
Yep.
for business plans.
Yep.
Would this template be good enough
It
for?
should. It should
Yep.
be. Yep. Because partly what they're looking at is kind of similar kind of stuff. They're going to be usually when you apply for COVID registration or certification at the state level. Usually, if you're a new business, they want to see the projections of what you expect in terms of revenue and also the different like range of businesses. What are you going to be doing? Are you going to be focusing on, say, home remodeling, or are you going to be, there's a difference between doing kind of landscape maintenance or doing landscape architecture, right, and landscape
Right.
design, putting in rock walls, right? So they're going to want to know the different ranges of business. They're also going to want to have some sense of, how much money are you putting into the business, and then what do you expect? For businesses that have already been in business, they're also going to ask for a couple of years of financial data, right? Of, what's been your business for the last few years? How much money have you made, right? So give us a kind of rough sense of your P&L for the last couple of years in your balance sheet, right? So
Okay. So I'm new to this. I just need to understand that. Can I register for COVID if I've just started my business?
yes, you can. You just have to go through the whole process, and they'll ask about your registrations and your licensing and the different areas of kind of construction you're going to do, or what kind of work you're going to do, because it doesn't have to be construction. It could be a lot of different things where you
Yeah.
get COVID certification, right? So,
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So
yeah,
I'm starting up my uh, technology business. Technology. I'm a technology consultant, and I
yep,
consult businesses for websites and search engine optimization and things like that. So definitely, I think this was really helpful for me, and I look forward to connecting with you, hopefully, whenever we can, and take this forward.
perfect. Happy to meet with you anytime, Eunice. Thanks for your question, and good luck with getting that certification. The people there tend to be pretty helpful, so I wouldn't, don't lose sight of just giving them a call if you need help with that certification process.
Sure, I'll do that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
What other questions do folks have? We got about 10 minutes left, maybe a little more if we want to stick around.
I have a few. I don't have a raise hand function, so
That's fine. No, all right, all good. Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Robert. I do rehome furnish. I source furniture for people coming out of transitional housing and similar situations. So I have a few questions. First of all, thank you for your presentation. That's clarifying on several issues. What was the COVID? What was Eunice referencing? I wasn't familiar with.
So COVID certification is so in the state of Oregon. There's lots of, it's called different things in different places. So it's the COVID stands for the Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity, and it's a way for, they have several different categories of either, all right, I put it in the chat. So it's certification for either minority-owned business, woman-owned business, veteran-owned business, somebody who's disability-owned business, right? So it's a certification process for that's used for a lot of different things. While a lot of people will end up getting COVID certification when they're looking to do government contracting, because government agencies have a certain percentage of any contract they're doing. Up to 30% of those contracts, sometimes more, are supposed to go to small businesses or minority-owned businesses or woman-owned businesses, et cetera. So it's a way to get your business registered to be recognized as within one of those categories. Historically disadvantaged businesses is
yeah. I thought you were saying COVID. So
yep. No, thanks. Yep.
Okay, so I had a couple different questions, and you take any or all, but so some of the stuff on here, I wasn't able to log in the very beginning, so forgive me if I missed it. But are these the materials you were referencing? Are they available like on SCORE or the Beaverton website?
They can be. I haven't put the slides up. I have all sorts of resources that I'll send. I have a couple pages of resources that I can send you later. Yeah, and I could conceivably convert it to a PDF, because then the links should work live.
Okay, and then general, I'm licensed as a B Corp. So do you have any just general suggestions for the slight differences in being a B Corp? And if it's not too tangential, how would you go about looking attractive for grants or loans as a new business?
Okay. So, and again, grants are hard for new businesses, but you might be able to get some, right? The benefit corporation, and are you going to try to go through the B Corp certification or that whole process?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And then you've already registered at the Oregon level when you registered your organization as a benefit corporation. So the key thing is to be able to actually what I'll call track impact, not just number of people served, but how have you made people's lives better? What have you done that is it's almost like a nonprofit organization. I have to demonstrate to my donors that here's the people who we've helped serve. This is the people that we've helped serve and be able to furnish their house, have a better quality of life, or they feel, right? So what's the change that you've made in people's lives, right? So, and that could be that. I mean, for some organizations, your benefit is you're reducing transport of stuff because you're growing things locally or sourcing things locally, right? So that could be your benefit. It could be environmental benefit. It could be the benefit to the people that you're serving. It also could in some ways be a benefit to people that work for you, right? So if you think in terms of some businesses, part of their social benefit is they will hire people that are historically underemployed. Maybe it's people who have come out of prison, or people who are aged out of the foster care system, or people who have a disability, right? So that could be part of your social benefit. It's just making sure it's very clear when you're doing reporting on this is how we are benefiting society by the work that we're doing. Yes, we're making money in the process, but we're serving this social benefit as well.
Yep.
Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Other questions, folks? We got about 5 minutes left. Certainly happy to take a few other questions. Again, I know I went through this very, very fast, but this was kind of just meant to be a quick overview and really an invitation for each of you to, to reach out to me here. I'll put my email in the chat. It's as easy as it gets. rob@beaverton.org will get a hold of me, and happy to set a one-on-one time to talk to any of you, follow up. And then as you're working on your business plan, if you would like to get some feedback on the plan, I'd be happy to do that. That's one of the main services that we provide here at Impact Beaverton, is helping people develop and tweak and improve their business plans. So whether they're going out and seeking funding or looking for investors or just better informing themselves and the other people around them, good business plan can help with all those things. So what other questions do you have? How else can I help?
I did one last quick one, I guess.
Please go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, one of the templates in there mentioned business in a box. Is that something that's proprietary? Is that you can buy it? Or
the business in a box one is, yeah, that one's the one that you end up having to pay for if you look for it. It's a business template, and it helps you go through, and it's got a bunch of questions. It's not necessarily, it's a decent resource, but that one does cost money. There are several free resources in there that don't cost anything. So, there's samples from the Secretary of State. There's, they have a template guide. SCORE's got some resource guides that you can look at if you go to SCORE's site. SBA's got information. So there's lots of it. And I'll send you those resources when we're done, so that you'll have a list of those. But yeah, there's plenty of free resources out there. You don't necessarily need to pay for them. So. What other questions? A few people we haven't heard from would love to hear a question or a hello from some of the other folks on the call.
Yep, I'll go ahead. So my name is Kenneth Dorsey. Recently joined the Chamber of Commerce. So I actually have a nonprofit organization that's been functioning out of Virginia. Recently moved to this area. So more so just trying to connect with the other members of the Chamber of Commerce and look to kind of connect with them as well going forward as I expand my organization out here. But thank you definitely, Rob, for this.
Yeah, thanks. And I know we've talked a little bit before. And if you want any, I've done workshops before. I may be doing one next month on business plans for nonprofits because they're different, right? But
Okay.
I mean, in terms of a nonprofit organization, a lot of what the business plan is for is to help feed into your funding efforts, right? For writing grants and doing that kind of stuff, but also stuff that you could communicate to just individual donors. And other kind of areas. So they are a little bit different, but and I think this is one of the things that they would speak to, kind of related to Robert's comment about a benefit corporation, is what are the specific outcomes and impact you're going to have in people's life, right? How are people going to be different having worked with you or having touched with you, right? You know, is there better quality of life? Are they healthier? Are they more conscious of the planet? Are they better at serving kids? Are they better at communicating across difference, right? So many different opportunities to show impact. So, but what a lot of nonprofits do is just show numbers. We serve 4,000 people. Great. How are those 4,000 people different, right? So it's nice to show the numbers, which are just kind of outputs. Better to show how is their life better having interacted with you or cross paths with you. So I don't know if that helps a little more. Robert probably thought about that a little bit. So. Cool. We got a couple minutes left. Does anybody have another question? We'd love to have another question if anybody's got one. We're right at 9:59. So
I'll do one more if no one else.
Perfect. Yeah, that's fine. Great.
Where could we, as new business owners or looking to start a business, where could we say network with each other, or are there meetups with mentors or just groups, whatever? So
there's several different things. So one of the things, actually, since you mentioned the mentor thing, so SCORE this Friday is having a Meet a Mentor event here in Beaverton. I believe it's over at City Hall at the Executive Suite. So that's Friday. I think it's from, if you go to our calendar, if you go to the Chamber of Commerce calendar, just go to beaverton.org and go to our events calendar. You can see the Meet a Mentor event. I can put our calendar up real quick. There we go. I'll put it in the chat. So that would be one opportunity that you would have. And then, all right, there's our events calendar. As Kenneth mentioned, I mean, we do a lot of networking events through the Chamber of Commerce. Right, so never a bad idea to, you don't have to join to come to the first couple of events. You can come check it out. So also on our event calendar, you'll see we have lots of different activities going on this week with ribbon cuttings, and next week coffee connections and after hours kind of things. There's lots of different opportunities to interact with other businesses and business owners. Those are a couple of the main sources. The other one is, depending on where you live, OAMI, Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs, has a lot of different networking events, and sometimes locally, MISO, the Micro Enterprise Services of Oregon, they host different events. So these are some places where people can go to network with other business owners. The other one to think about is, you mentioned Meetup, right? So there's that whole thing of Meetup groups, and I know there are some business Meetup groups. I'm not really a part of any of those, but might be worth checking out as well. All right, it's 10:01. If anybody has one more question, I'd be happy to take one more question. 2 questions in the chat. Okay. So if you have any follow-up, again, please send me an email at rob@beaverton.org. I usually get back to you pretty quick. If you have any individual questions or looking for other resources, please let me know. Would like to thank Gustavo for helping monitor chat and get things set up today. And thank you, Linda, for doing the translating service. Appreciate it. And I look forward to meeting with each of you individually or in another small group sometime in the near future. I hope this was helpful to you today, and I will catch up to you very soon. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.